Episode 2: Muhammad, the Caliphs and Jihad. To understand Islam, its Sharia law, the Islamic slave trade and terrorism, it is essential that we are acquainted with the history of the founder of Islam and his successors, the Caliphs.
Muhammad, the praised one, the founder of Islam, was born in the city of Mecca in AD 570. According to Muslim legend, he was born clean, circumcised, with his umbilical cord cut, and immediately proclaimed, Allahu Akbar, God is great. His father, Abd Allah, died before Muhammad's birth. His mother, Amina, a sickly woman described as involved in the occult and prone to hallucinations, died when Muhammad was only 6 years old. Muhammad was then cared for by his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, who died 3 years later. The 9-year-old Muhammad was then entrusted into the care of his uncle, Abu Talib, who used him as a camel driver in his caravans. Biographers have noted that Muhammad grew up as a deeply resentful young man, frustrated by his powerlessness and relegated to the fringes of society. When Muhammad was 25, the Ethiopians threatened Mecca. Muhammad ran away from the battlefield and became a social outcast exposed to contempt and ostracism. Muhammad then became a shepherd, the lowest social position in Arabia. Later he became an assistant to a travelling cloth merchant, and this work took him to Hayacha, where he met Khadija, a wealthy widow, 15 years older than he. Muhammad entered her service as a camel driver and eventually rose to become her supervisor. When Khadija chose to marry Muhammad, his transition from rags to riches was assured. For the next 10 years, Muhammad developed Khadija's business, displaying skills and talent previously unrealized. It was during this time that Muhammad began to spend time meditating in solitude, sometimes for weeks on end, in the caves of Mount Hira. It was in the year AD 610, when Muhammad was 40 years old, that he reported to Khadija a disturbing experience. He feared that he was being possessed by demons. It was then that Khadija exclaimed, "Rejoice, O son of my uncle, and be of good heart. By him in whose hand is Khadija's soul, I hope that thou wilt be the prophet of his people." Khadija assured him that such a virtuous man as he could not be a victim of demonic delusions, but should accept his experience as a visitation by an angel, and that he should accept the call with humility and gladness. Khadija became the first believer in Islam. From that time on, Muhammad received revelations which he claimed came directly from God. Sometimes there were physical symptoms that accompanied these revelations. Muhammad would hear the sound of bells. He would perspire profusely, even on a cold day, froth and foam at the mouth, writhe in agony, jerk around. His eyes would roll backward and he would lose consciousness and enter a trance-like state. In AD 613, Muhammad began to publicly preach his revelations. Initially, his message was simple, and Muhammad described his mission as limited to one task: only to warn. Surah 11 and 12. Muhammad preached the need to submit to Allah and warned of the end of the world and the day of judgment, when all would be either condemned to the torments of hell or allowed entry into paradise. Muhammad's ministry was received with indifference and derision by most Meccans. However, among his first few converts were Muhammad's slave and adopted son Zayd, and his cousin Ali, the son of Abu Talib, and his close friend and lifelong companion, Abu Bakr. The leaders of Mecca sneered at the audacity of this common man with no natural claim to authority or prestige, who dared to command the obedience of his superiors. They saw Muhammad's preaching against their idols as a subversive ploy designed to undermine the established social order. Despite Muhammad's attempt at appeasement, offering a theological compromise and accommodating the three most popular Meccan deities, the moon god's daughters, Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, and Manat, as capable of interceding with Allah on behalf of the faithful, the Meccans ridiculed Muhammad. Who did this pretentious shepherd think he was? This coward who had fled from the battlefield? This destitute boy who owed his fortune to marrying a widow old enough to be his mother? Sarcasm and spite were hurled at him by an increasingly hostile population. The Mirage. The painful mockery and harassment failed to discourage Muhammad. His claims grew even more extravagant. In AD 621, Muhammad claimed that the angel Gabriel took him from Mecca to Jerusalem, where he prayed at the temple, the furthest mosque, and journeyed through the seven heavens, encountering previous prophets such as Adam, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, and was ushered into the very presence of God himself. All these events supposedly transpired in the course of one night, while his companions testified that his body remained in Mecca. Unfortunately for Muhammad, the temple in Jerusalem had been destroyed in AD 70. However, he was apparently unaware of that fact. As he hoped to be accepted by Christians and Jews as a prophet, Muhammad's early revelations included positive statements about the people of the book, and Muslims were commanded to observe the Jewish Sabbath and pray in the direction of Jerusalem. Later, when it was plain that the Jews and Christians rejected his prophethood, Muhammad dropped the Jewish Sabbath and changed the direction from Jerusalem to Mecca. In the same year as Muhammad's supposed journey into heaven, the Mirage, AD 619, his uncle Abu Talib, who had protected him, died. Then Muhammad's wife Khadija died a few months later. The leadership of his clan passed to another uncle, Abu Lahab, who withdrew the clan's protection from Muhammad. Muhammad became a despised and unwanted outcast, vulnerable and in an increasingly desperate and precarious situation. The Hijra. However, Muhammad's fortunes were about to change. A group of men from the oasis of Yathrib, later to be called Medina, some 200 miles north, traveled to Mecca for the annual pilgrimage to the Kaaba, identified themselves as Muslims, and promised to propagate Muhammad's message in Yathrib. In June AD 622, a group of 75 men from Yathrib came and professed Islam, pledging to defend Muhammad as one of their own. At this point, a council of elders in Mecca were being assembled to try Muhammad as a traitor. This was when Muhammad chose to flee Mecca, the Hijra. Muhammad's arrival in Yathrib on 24th of September AD 622 marked the beginning of the calendar of Islam, after Hijra, or AH. From that point on, Yathrib became the city of the Prophet Medinet el-Nibai, which has been shortened to Medina. It was at this point, when Muhammad would finally have armed men at his disposal, that he received his first revelations permitting jihad. Jihad. In Medina, he was given a plot of land and a house, but he was continually short of money. Then Muhammad authorized attacks on the Meccan merchant caravans. Muhammad's first 3 attacks in AD 623 were all failures. However, in early AD 624, the Muslims executed their first successful ambush of a merchant caravan. Their attack achieved complete surprise because it took place in the holy month of Ramadan, a time of truce respected by even the most vicious bandits until that time. Muhammad had just received a revelation allowing warfare during the holy month of Ramadan. Aside from the loot captured, Muhammad held 2 prisoners captive until their relatives paid a ransom of 80 ounces of silver. On 15th of March AD 624, the Battle of Badr occurred when Muhammad's 300 men defeated a protective force more than 3 times their number. When 40 Meccans were killed and 60 taken prisoner for the loss of only 14 Muslims, this was interpreted as a glorious victory for Muhammad and a miracle of Allah. The prisoners were brought before Muhammad and beheaded in cold blood. one of the prisoners pleaded for his life, asking that he be allowed to take care of his little girl. Muhammad's response was, "Hell fire." Muhammad then rejoiced as the man was beheaded. Muhammad established a principle that 1/5 of all the loot was always to be given to Muhammad. Know that out of all the booty that ye may acquire, in war, a 5th share is assigned to God and to the Apostle. Surah 8 and 41. Assassinations. As Muhammad strengthened his power base in Medina, he ordered or suggested the assassination of various critics. This included Asma bint Marwan, a poetess who produced poems ridiculing Muhammad and those who followed him. "Will no one rid me of this daughter of Marwan?" exclaimed Muhammad. One Muslim, Umayr, that very night responded by stabbing her as she nursed her youngest child. Abu Afak, a man over 100 years old, who protested against the murders by Muhammad's Muslims and produced poems mocking Muhammad, was also murdered at the word of Muhammad. A Jewish poet, Kabin al-Ashraf, whose poems grieved for the victims of the Muslim assassins, was treacherously slain by a Muslim who pretended to befriend the victim until he could entice him away from his home and family to murder him. Next, a Jewish merchant, Ibn Sunayna, was murdered by one of Muhammad's disciples. Then a prominent elderly Jewish merchant, Abu Rafi, was hacked to death by 6 Muslims while he slept in his bed at night. After this cold-blooded murder, the 6 men argued over which of them had actually killed the man. At this, Muhammad smiled and started to check their swords. He pointed out that the one whose sword still had traces of food on the blade was the winner, for Abu Rafi would have just finished dinner before falling asleep. The Hadith records the names of at least 27 individuals who were murdered on Muhammad's orders. Mass murders and mass rapes. Muhammad arranged for practically all the Jews living in Arabia to either be killed or exiled from their homes and country. After murdering individual Jews, Muhammad expelled 2 tribes from Medina. The Jewish tribe of Banu Nadir was ordered to leave Medina within 10 days. When they refused, Muhammad's men besieged them and starved them into submission. After several weeks, they surrendered and were expelled. All their belongings and land were confiscated and distributed amongst Muhammad's supporters. The Jews of Banu Nadir were slaughtered by the Muslims 2 years later in their new homes. In AD 626, when Muhammad's followers attacked the tribe of Banu al-Mustalik, the Muslims slaughtered many tribesmen and looted thousands of their camels and sheep. They also kidnapped some of their excellent women. Then Muhammad's followers subjected the captive women to gang rape. The Hadith records how some of the Muslims went to Muhammad with a problem. Abu Sa'id al-Qadri remembered that they questioned Muhammad on whether it was acceptable to practice sexual intercourse with the captive women by observing azl, or coitus interruptus. "We desired them, for we were suffering from the absence of our wives, but at the same time we also desired ransom for them. So we asked Allah's Messenger, may peace be upon him, and he said, 'It does not matter if you do not do it, for every soul that is to be born up to the day of the resurrection will be born.'" Muhammad's revelations had already sanctioned the rape of captive women, those captive whom your right hand possesses. Surah 4 and 24. On this occasion, the only concern seemed to be whether the victims' ransom value would be diminished or lost if they were returned pregnant to their husbands. Muhammad effectively told his companions to go ahead and rape the captive women without worrying about whether or not they would get pregnant. In AD 627, the Meccans mobilized a huge army of 10,000 men to end the threat of this traitor who was disrupting their commerce. The Battle of the Ditch was a victory for Muhammad. The trenches his men had dug at strategic places around Medina prevented the enemy cavalry from being effectively deployed. As the Meccans withdrew, Muhammad proceeded to attack the last Jewish tribe in Medina, the Banu Qurayza. Muhammad ordered the men to convert to Islam or face death. When they refused, up to 900 were decapitated in front of their wives and children at the ditch. The widows were subsequently raped and sold into slavery. Muhammad chose Rayhana bint Amr as his concubine. Despite this poor woman having witnessed both her father and husband slaughtered before her eyes only hours before, Muhammad forced himself on her that night. Muhammad taught, captive virgin girls in war were made lawful for the soldiers for copulation. Mishkat 2, page 440. The polygamous prophet. Muhammad had lived 25 years in marriage with his first wife Khadijah. But after her death and the hijrah to Medina, Muhammad married at least another 15 wives. Many of these were widows or divorcees. One of Muhammad's wives, Aisha, was 6 years old when she was given in marriage to him, and 9 years old when he consummated the marriage, according to the Hadith. In AD 628, Mary the Copt, a Christian slave, was given to Muhammad by the governor of Egypt, El-Makaukas. The Hadith records that the wives of Muhammad were jealous when Muhammad had no dealings with any of them for a full month, living with Mary alone. Although Muhammad received a revelation rebuking the jealousy of his wives, he also put into the Quran a verse prohibiting his wives from remarrying after his death. When Muhammad married his daughter-in-law Zainab, the community was scandalized. Zainab was the only wife of Zaid, Muhammad's adopted son. One day when Muhammad came to Zaid's house, he noticed the youthful beauty of his daughter-in-law's scantily clad body. The Hadith records how Muhammad exclaimed, "Praise be Allah, who changes men's hearts." When Zainab reported the incident to Zaid, he rushed over to Muhammad to offer to divorce his wife and give her to him. After initially refusing this offer, Muhammad received a revelation where Allah supposedly instructed him to marry his daughter-in-law, Zainab. In the 8th year after the Hijrah, January AD 630, the city of Mecca surrendered to Muhammad. At the head of an army of 10,000, Muhammad entered the city in triumph. In AD 632, Muhammad died of a violent fever at age 62, the 11th year of the Hijrah.
The Caliphs.
The Caliphate was instituted as an attempt to regulate politics based on the legacy of Muhammad.
The Caliph was Allah's viceroy on earth, combining both religious and political power in the tradition of the Prophet. The 4 caliphs who followed in the apostolic tradition of Prophet Muhammad were
Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman and Ali.
These rightly guided ones successively ruled as caliphs from the Prophet's death in AD 632 to 661. This has been regarded by Muslims as the golden age of Islam. Abu Bakr, the first caliph, was the father of Aisha. The wars of apostasy that raged during Abu Bakr's brief caliphate were necessitated because the conversions to Islam by many tribes were apparently acts of expediency or survival rather than sincere or wholehearted choice. Abu Bakr died in AD 634. The Caliph Umar expanded the boundaries of Islam by raiding the frontiers of Byzantium and Persia.
By the time of Umar's death, Syria, Egypt and parts of Persia had fallen to the Arabs. The Byzantines suffered a major defeat at the Battle of Yarmouk, AD 636. Jerusalem was captured in AD 638. The Persians were defeated in Nayavand in AD 641, and the conquest of northern Egypt was completed in AD 641. Umar made extensive use of former imperial mercenaries and military slaves who advised the Arabs in the science of battlefield tactics and military technology. In AD 644, Umar's brilliant military career was cut short when an Iraqi assassinated him while he was at prayer in a mosque.
The third caliph, Uthman ibn Affan, consolidated and expanded Umayyad's conquests.
By trying to unify the Muslim empire, Uthman met much resistance. Many were also aggravated by his forcible standardization of the Quran. All versions and copies of the Quran had to be surrendered under the pain of death for destruction. In the end, Uthman issued a new, revised, standardized version of the Quran which endures to this day. In AD 656, Caliph Uthman was assassinated in a gruesome way and was not allowed to be buried in a Muslim cemetery. As his wife and friends tried to bury him by night, they were cursed and stoned by Arabs. Uthman was buried in a Jewish cemetery. Caliph Ali was Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law. From his new capital, Damascus, he attempted to consolidate the Islamic Empire, amidst widespread accusations that he had been behind the murder of Caliph Uthman. With the support of Aisha, Talha and al-Zubayr rebelled against Ali. In the Battle of the Camel, 10,000 Muslims were killed. Although Ali won this battle, he then faced an uprising from Muawiyah, the governor of Syria, who also accused him of complicity in the assassination of Uthman. The resulting battle cost many lives, but without any decisive victory. Muawiyah and Ali agreed to appoint an arbitrator. This undermined the authority of Ali, who was assassinated by one of his former supporters. Ali's eldest son, Muhammad's grandson, Hassan, was seen as the rightful heir.
But when Muawiyah opposed his succession, Hassan, plagued by many defections, abandoned the caliphate and fled to live quietly in Medina for the rest of his life.
Muawiyah then ruled not only Syria and Egypt, but the whole Islamic empire. Ali's other son, al-Hussein, together with most of his family, was murdered on the orders of Khalifa Yazid in October AD 680. This Battle of Karbala was actually more of an assassination than a battle. Hussein's head was sent to Yazid in Damascus. This sealed the split in Islam between the Sunni and Shiite. The Shiites still regard Ali and his sons, Hassan and Hussein, as the only legitimate line of succession. Hussein is commemorated as a martyr.
Despite the jealousies, intrigues, deceit, dissensions, hatred and mass murders, most Muslims look upon the early period of the four rightly guided caliphs as the most ideal model of the Ummah, one that was never attained in subsequent centuries, but should be striven for. Thank you for listening to episode 2 of Show the House to the House. You can now listen to episode 3 on the same channel.